They are the largest anti-government protests in Turkey for many years, revealing the disquiet of many with a leader who's been at the head of government for more than 2 decades. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is trying to keep a lid on the demonstrations, with thousands of people gathering again in Istanbul tonight, following the arrest of the city's mayor last week. Ekrem Imamoglu, a vocal opponent of the president, was taken into custody on corruption charges, and since then, more than 1,000 people have been arrested, among them left-wing politicians, lawyers and journalists in pre-dawn raids. One opposition leader says Turkey is at a crossroads between democracy and authoritarian rule. Well, Ola Gerin has our top story tonight from Istanbul.
Istanbul tonight. One more night of mass protests. One more night of defying a government ban on demonstrations. There's been nothing like this here for over a decade. And the chant tonight, President Ekrem. Supporters of the city's jailed mayor demanding his release and calling for him to be Turkey's next leader. For a 6th night, the protests are continuing here, and the mayor has sent a message to his supporters from inside his jail cell. He has said, "We will succeed together, and I will continue to watch you here and in squares around the country." But he also urged young people to avoid violence and confrontation with the security forces. Many here are eager for change, but afraid of being identified. Berkan, who's 24, knows the risks of speaking out.
So here is the catch. I can't say, because I know if I say, tomorrow morning they will take me from my home. In the Ankara, in the Eskişehir, in the Izmir, the students, which they are just using their rights to protest, to just talk with the government, to just talk with the people, to just supporting their democracy. Every day, every morning, they are taking from their home, which they are not attacking anyone.
And more protesters were hauled away here tonight. Over 1,000 people have been detained in the past 5 days, as the mayor of Istanbul was before them. Ekrem Imamoglu was the picture of composure in this home video, even as police massed outside his door. He said he was entrusting himself to his nation and he would not bow to tyranny. Turkey says its courts are independent. Taking it all in his stride today, Turkey's ageing leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He accused the mayor and his party of doing harm to the country and predicted their show would eventually end. He's hoping the protests will peter out, and tonight a surprise statement from the opposition. Tomorrow will be the last rally at City Hall. It's unclear what their next move may be. But Turkey is facing a fork in the road. Can it be a functioning democracy, or is it heading for all-out autocracy?
More from Ola in a moment, but President Erdogan is accusing the opposition in Turkey of disturbing the peace of our citizens with provocations after the week-long protests. And it's not just rival politicians and demonstrators his security forces are rounding up. Here's Ros Atkins.
As protests in Turkey spread, there's a clampdown on the streets and on the media too.
And for the last few weeks, it's really been suffocating to be a journalist in Turkey.
At the weekend, the broadcasting watchdog urged news outlets to focus on official information rather than biased and unrealistic news, and warned that licenses could be revoked. Then there are multiple reports that on Monday, at least 10 journalists were detained in Istanbul and Izmir, including 2 prominent freelance journalists. And while these protests are new, pressure on Turkey's media isn't. President Erdogan's been in power for 22 years. Under him, 90% of national media is under government control. Turkey ranks 158th on one press freedom index. And increasingly central to restricting the media is technology. In Turkey, Instagram, WhatsApp and YouTube are particularly popular. All have seen access restricted in recent days. Then there's Elon Musk's platform X. He's previously declared free speech is the bedrock of democracy. In recent days, multiple X accounts have become unavailable in Turkey. Such as the account of journalist Ark Ajarash, who's a critic of President Erdogan and lives in exile. X says there have been multiple court orders to block over 700 accounts of news organisations, journalists, political figures, students and others. It says it objects to this, though it has complied. President Erdogan wants to contain these protests and the media coverage of them. Both are a test of his power.
Ros Atkins reporting there. Let's return to Orla live in Istanbul for us. One wonders, Orla, what the international response has been to these protests, to all the people taken to the streets as they have.
It's been pretty limited, Clive, pretty muted. The European Union called on Turkey to uphold democratic values. There was some criticism from France and Germany, but in fact the strongest statements have come from human rights organisations, Human Rights Watch saying this was another example of the politicisation of the judiciary and of the judiciary being used to stifle legitimate political activity. It said this was a very dark day for democracy in Turkey. I think it's worth remembering that this country is a regional heavyweight. It's a powerful NATO nation. It's an important ally for many. And people don't seem to be in a hurry to pick a row with President Erdogan. And also, let's not forget, Clive, that international attention is focused on the White House. So many countries, so many leaders are watching in bewilderment what's coming out of the White House every day. So that has taken attention away from here. It's taken the focus away from President Erdogan. And that has been very much to his advantage to allow him to continue a process that we have seen here basically uninterrupted for the last few years, in which democratic institutions are hollowed out, critics are intimidated, silenced, exiled or jailed. We now have the fact that the main rival of President Erdogan, the mayor, Ekrem Imamoglu, the mayor of the city who was elected by millions, who was voted in 3 times, he sits tonight in a jail cell where all he can do is send out messages via his social media account. So one more powerful rival, perhaps the most important rival of President Erdogan, is now, for the moment at least, out of the picture.
All right. Orla, thank you for that. Orla Gearin there live in Istanbul.